I think there's a marked difference between a larger organisation where you've got a very defined structure, approval flows, higher management structure, and comparing that to a startup and a scale-up organisation. There's a lot more agility in terms of learning things on the fly and also being able to act a little bit more quickly and heightening that responsiveness that typically would have a larger chain of approvals at a bigger org.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Chain Reaction podcast. As always, we talk logistics, and today I have Emma Stone, VP of Global Operations at Hurdle. She's a guest in. She works for nearly 20 years in logistics and supply chain space, specifically in the medical sector and the medical devices and testing. And it would be quite interesting to talk about your perspective on variety of logistics things. So, thanks very much, Emma, for agreeing to speak with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We had a short discussion before, and we talked that you have experience working in both like FTSE 100 companies as well as startups. So it would be quite interesting to kind of get a little bit of your kind of the feel of how the logistics space, but in the environment of a startup differs versus a global corporate, and then we'll take that perspective kind of forward in the questioning, and maybe talk a little bit more about Hurdle because it's a fascinating business as well.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So exactly as you touched on, I've worked in different environments, both large structured orgs as well as much leaner, smaller. And particularly working in this space in supply chain and operations, I think there's a marked difference between a larger organization where you've got a very defined structure, approval flows, higher management structure. And comparing that to a startup and a scale-up organization, there's a lot more agility in terms of learning things on the fly and also being able to act a little bit more quickly and heightening that responsiveness that typically would have a larger chain of approvals at a bigger org. That being said, obviously at a smaller org, there are typically less folks, less people, less resources. So there's very much more pooling of resources and being more flexible between roles rather than having defined owners, a defined RACI matrix, for example, in terms of who's responsible for what. So part of working in a startup really is doing that work to find out, okay, who's best placed to take on certain tasks, and trying to navigate through that communication as much as trying to establish a structure and define the path forward.
Thank you. RACI brings me back to my consulting days, so I know exactly what you mean. But Hurdle, I wanted to talk a little bit about the business. So it's actually quite an interesting concept, and it's quite a new evolution of the medical diagnosis and testing concept in the UK market. So can you talk a little bit about the business and specifically about the logistics part of it?
Yeah, certainly. So what a Hurdle offers is essentially a bundling of services. There is a platform structure that enables clients and patients to manage their order placement, test selection in terms of, whether it's a certain blood test that they're looking for or a genetics test, managing those requirements, that ordering profile. And it really guides the client or the patient through that journey with regards to receiving, whether it's an at-home kit or an appointment for a clinic, being able to take a sample, send a sample back to a partner lab and getting their results. And it's really streamlining that offering and having that pathway as clean as possible for clients and as easily accessible as possible. And what we do in Hurdle really is bundle the managed services that really deliver that diagnostics piece. So we take on the responsibility of owning, selecting our partners, whether those are labs, whether it's carrier services, couriers, things like the clinic services that I talked upon as well. So it's really taking the the complexity out of the equation for our clients and offering that managed pathway. And really is, very much hot topic in healthcare, not just the UK, but across the world where we operate. It's around patient accessibility as well. So part of the tools and the platform we offer offers exactly that, and brings the service closer to the patient, and really offers them the accessibility that they need to manage their health.
Kind of convenience. So interesting, because that actually almost resonates very well with kind of with Flocks, what we do kind of on the scale for logistics overall. But for as my understanding that what you guys is you are an integration platform. So you bring together I don't know, surgeries and clinics that provide the kind of they are on the patient facing side of things. Then on the other side you have labs that actually do the actual physical testing of bloods and various other samples, and you are in between kind of organizing and orchestrating all of these flows, as well as physically executing the processes of, I don't know, having carriers who can deliver to like Amazon, who can deliver the kind of the sampling kits and the containers and for deposits, and then they obviously can be, I don't know, connected or sent back, and then processing, and then enabling the healthcare providers to actually view the information, give access to patients potentially of that information. And so this is actually fascinating, and I think it's definitely a step forward in patient care and the convenience. What I would love us to kind of explore a little bit more is kind of because you mentioned and kind of globally we all go in that direction, and kind of resilience of supply chain networks and logistics networks is becoming quite a major consideration, if not concern, for a variety of businesses, anything from FMCG to kind of the medical fields. So I would be quite interesting to get your perspective on what does resilience mean to you, because you can have many people with different opinions, but I'd love you to also explore a point of view with, well, how that may or is different to a large corporation versus a smaller business, what resilience means for these kind of different operational environments.
Yeah, certainly. So you touched on, I think, the world where it is now, whether we're talking about pandemics or political shifts, it really is calling on all orgs, whether large or small, to really take resilience and the ability to adapt to scenarios very seriously. And that's throughout the org as well, but specifically in supply chains, it could be things such as making the right sourcing decisions. And with smaller orgs, leaner orgs, startup scale up, typically you have greater challenges in managing like supply bases, for example, and having that purchasing power, that bargaining power with suppliers, and trying to manage that supplier portfolio and that preferred supplier list to really augment the organization to what it needs to be resilient, but also maintaining a good relationship. So I think certainly working in a smaller organization compared to a larger, it's finding that balance and finding that sweet spot between what a preferred supplier list looks like and maintaining those good relationships. But particularly like we are at Hurdle, dealing with suppliers from around the world, not just in the UK, it's managing that portfolio of that approved supply list to make sure it is built for resilience and spreading that risk. So yeah, decisions that may be easier to do at a larger scale, such as dual sourcing or multi-sourcing, that definitely has to be a little bit more, I think, thoughtful at a smaller level. And really with a view of, okay, what makes sense for the scale of this organization, and what can we effectively manage. But certainly the decision as well with, going back to supplier sourcing as an example, making that decision between what was historically considered low cost and taking the total cost into consideration, things such as cost of quality, the risk, the supply continuity. It's really more of a blended assessment and analysis than just looking at that bottom line or that purchase order cost. So I think that's critical when thinking about sourcing decisions with supply chain resilience, and taking more factors into account than historically just that bottom line. Yeah, things like making decisions with trade. Obviously, we hear a lot in the news, in the US in particular, with the impact of trade and tariffs, and certainly making those decisions to source from other countries is now more complex, and there are bigger considerations in play now rather than just the cost of getting something from A to B. There's the implications around, how much a tariff is going to cost an organization and at what scale that hits. Also, the actual work involved with managing that as well, having folks that are in a position to manage the customs documentation and handle the compliance piece. There's a lot of complexity now in what it takes to trade internationally.
I understand completely. So yeah, I appreciate that larger corporates, they have a lot of buying power, and if they represent quite a significant chunk of spend for a particular client, they actually can demand better prices, they demand better service levels, they demand various other kind of concessions potentially from a supplier. And if you're a smaller business, then it's very hard to be kind of to get the right level of attention that your business might require. But I'm sure that there are some forward-looking businesses that are actually happy. They can see you. Well, actually, it's a business that can grow, that has a great potential, so that they're keen to build good relationships. On the other hand, I'm sure you guys can compensate by having faster decision-making process. It's not as kind of rigid. Yes, in the medical field, no, I appreciate that there's quite a lot of standards and the elements that needed to be complied with on hygienes and the rest of it, the factors, but it's faster decision making, faster I don't know, order processing, or flexibility in anything, or indeed ability to quickly swap, not necessarily suppliers for the products, for example, like the transport providers or the warehousing setup and whatever the operational setup that will reflect. So that kind of agility, I'm sure, will give you more flexibility to match the cost base as effectively as possible. But I can imagine that in order to be effective with this, we actually kind of getting into the technology space. So we are technology business, you guys are technology business. I think technology, this is my fundamental belief, and this is why I do what I do, is technology is playing a ever bigger part in running effective operations, even in the spaces like logistics, where to an outsider is like, well, it trucks and sheds. What can go wrong? Well, so many things. So I'd like you to elaborate, if you can. It's like, how do you guys technologically addressing effectiveness and agility and flexibility, as well as resilience of your networks? So not just from the organization and contractual and relationship point of view, but also technologically. I don't want to use the word AI, but if AI helps you, please tell us.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And AI is a facet of that overall piece. In terms of the impact of technology, I will touch a little bit about AI as well, and how that's helping the industry and our disciplines. But yeah, even thinking to things such as data warehouse management, which obviously is not a new concept, but it's evolving, and actually AI does in fact play a role into that as well. When we talk about things like the geopolitical risk and the fluctuations that we're seeing in policies, or just the volatility of landscapes and how it is to operate in certain markets. The importance of having good data hygiene is really fundamental to how you operate a business, whether that's large or small. So are you capturing and gathering the right data? Are your metrics what they need to be? And certainly some of the advancements we've had at Hurdle over the last couple of years have really lent itself towards how do we track what success looks like for us, for our clients, and the end customer and patient. And it could be things around, we talked a bit about the logistics piece. What are our on time in full metrics? How do we measure that? How do we hold our carrier services and couriers to account, to deliver to service levels and things like that, which is really critically important when we're dealing things such as like a biological sample that needs to be sent to a laboratory. So having those tools to hand to make sure that we've got, like I said, a good data hygiene, but also getting on top of those issues and de-risking before there's any customer or patient impact. Having the ability to do that quickly and proactively, is I think where we're seeing quite a strong trend in improving how we operate in supply chains. And yeah, touching on the AI piece as well. So AI is really, I think, fundamental to how we manage some of these risks throughout the end-to-end supply chain as well. And it could be things such as supply level risk scoring, so understanding where there's risks throughout the supply chain, whether that's at supplier level, end supplier level, or it could be throughout the logistics piece or the manufacturing piece. And I think being able to differentiate between what may be breaking news and what we're hearing about as potential risks and volatility, and actually taking real data from that, knowing when to act as well, and how we apply our resources to counteract some of the risks that we're seeing. Things as well, thinking about inventory management as well. So again, machine learning AI, there's an incredibly strong play in managing inventory, being able to, so say if we're talking a lot about risk management here, say if there is risks in the market, how do we flex to account for that in things like safety stock, and having AI do recalibration on a safety stock, so you have a dynamic movement rather than a fixed number that is continual. That's really helping to reduce what previously we may have seen in human bias with forecasting and demand planning, and really having intelligent safety stock management happening.
You are listening to Chain Reaction. This podcast is brought to you by Phlox, the leading marketplace for the supply chain and logistics industry.
It's very interesting. This is one of the areas that kind of fascinates us as well, and we also invest quite a lot of effort into kind of putting AI into what we do. But I'd love to get your perspective on kind of how you approach this, because AI is essentially, there's a lot of kind of large language models and large analytical models, and it could be like open source, closed source. But I think the biggest trick is what are the practical uses and the practical uses or kind of use cases, or how people use the AI. And I'll give you kind of two sides of how I see this. Is it could be one element, it could be built into a system, which is almost like a silent co-pilot that sits behind kind of whatever is going on, whatever you as a user or the business is doing, and it identifies or anticipates things, and then highlights potential problems, or anticipates, as you said, like inventory, stock out, so on and so forth. Or it could be a regular but kind of standalone or ad hoc type assessments, where you as a user just extract a bunch of data, load it into an AI system, I don't know, ChatGPT, for example, or Grok or something, and then you say, well, analyze this and and please answer these and these and these questions. So how do you guys use the system, and how, and in particular for which types of issues, whether it's inventory or whether it's a risk assessment, because those are two different things.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. And I think it comes back to this piece around predictability or lack thereof. So there are certain, knowns or expectations that, there will be delivery delays at some point, and having that inbuilt AI modeling, be able to identify those so we can problem solve and fix for those before we break an SLA. Some of the workflow management, again, the AI automation piece playing a role there to take some of that regular or reoccurring management of workflows out of the hands of somebody that can be spending their time and resource somewhere else. So there's certainly some AI roles being played there in terms of capturing those reoccurring data points, and again, going back to things like managing your metrics and your KPIs, things like where it is going to be, say, more ad hoc and as and when needed, is probably these force majeures or these unforeseen events, where you obviously need to plug in the data and essentially start training the model on the scenario that's unfolding, and then having AI play that role in helping manage that incident and being able to form a plan. And I think in generally, the use of AI, whether it is inbuilt or on an ad hoc basis, is really about understanding what are those tasks that we can be taking away from a human operator to help make informed decisions a lot quicker. And then where do we redeploy those human resources, those people, to the more creative skills that I think, it really goes understated in supply chain management and operations, things around, being creative, a problem solver, communication, strategy planning, the negotiating and those techniques. So it's really finding the areas to where both elements, both the human element and the AI element can harmonize and work together, rather than replacing all of those tasks off the get-go with just sending it through AI.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, this is, and maybe taking it as slightly wider, not just AI, but technology in general. So you touched upon how it's impacting the colleagues, the workforce within the business. You also mentioned earlier it is kind of impacting communications with your suppliers as well as the customers. So if we take that as a starting point, so how do you see the skill set of the colleagues that within the business, and how the communication with external parties is being impacted by technology? What do you think is the direction of travel, and what do you think the businesses need to be focusing on going forward to make it as effective as augmenting and technology being augmenting human skills rather than replacing them?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's over the last probably couple of years, I think it's really a case of seeing the influence and the importance of what we call soft skills in the workplace, and dealing with stakeholders. That's really becoming critical now to success. Things like, if I take an example like contract management and managing your procurement contracts. So AI can be really influential in being able to sift through contracts, as an example, that you have with key suppliers, finding where the pertinent points may be, specifically, I think, where you have a lot of red lines and a lot of back and forth with contracts, using some AI tools to actually to pull out the context that you need from a contract. Saves an incredible amount of time, especially when you're talking about some contracts, which, in regulated industries, may be 20, 30 pages plus. So that's a huge time saver to pull out those points. But being able to extract those key points, finding out where, say, your obligations are as a supplier or a consumer are, finding out where the priorities would be in that contract is really helpful. But then there's still that element, and that I still foresee the continuation of having that element of contract negotiation. And there's a lot of soft skill that comes into that. It could be how you communicate with the other party, especially where you've got live negotiations going on, and what type of bargaining happening, and even the empathy skills in being able to see from a perspective other than your own, and finding consensus with a final fully agreed contract, because the contract is just the start to a supply relationship. That's really phase one. Beyond a contract sign, you've then got all the supplier management and the collaboration required to deliver on whatever it is you're delivering. So I think that's a good example, and probably just relationship management more generally, of where AI is a very useful tool that goes hand in hand with that discipline. But there's still a heavy human element involved with that, and whether it's the relationship growing, the problem solving, there's still that element from a person that's really going to make that relationship successful. I think another example, actually, as well, thinking around how AI and big data can go hand in hand with those soft skills, is things like SNOP planning. So we talked a little bit about inventory management, safety stocks. More broadly speaking, there's some really cool techniques that you can use for demand planning using AI and machine learning. There's some scenario modeling that you can do. You can find out what the cause and effect of making certain adjustments can be, typically a lot quicker than a traditional ERP or MRP model structure. But with SNOP planning, anyone that's been involved with those meetings and having to find that consensus on a monthly basis, there's a lot of cross-functional relationship management there, understanding the constraints from other departments, resolving conflicts sometimes as well, and then finally coming to an agreed plan at the end of that process. So inevitably, there's typically a core amount of people involved in that process, and having that relationship work well is really integral to delivering on those plans.
It's very interesting and fascinating. You brought up a couple of really good examples. What the next question is like almost like comes off immediately after what you've just said is what kind of thoughts, maybe advice you would give to either young professionals that want to start in that business or the companies that are early at embarking upon that kind of technological evolution journey. And I'm not necessarily just talking about AI specific, but technology kind of interconnectedness, the analytics, the ability for the systems driven kind of the communication and relationships. What kind of advice would you give to the people? Like what good looks like? What are the misconceptions that maybe need to be rethought, and how to approach this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think from my perspective, whether it's, to your point, AI or technology more generally, whether it's a new person coming into this industry, somebody starting off their career path, I think really looking at these technology tools such as AI as a very important skill, but a skill within your skills toolbox. So things like the problem solving, the critical thinking, that's something that's not really what AI is designed for, and it shouldn't be replacing those skills, those human skills that somebody has. I think there's a really good argument to seeing AI as almost a mentor on your journey as well, in your career path. And in fact, there are, as you'll know, there's some AI models out there that have student modes or learning modes, which can supplement that really well. And in terms of understanding, okay, help me work through this problem, or I have this incident that's occurred, give me some guidance on how I would solve it. And that can be really useful, whatever your career. That can be really useful in helping you develop those own critical thinking skills, building up your own industry knowledge of how you would problem solve. So yeah, if there's a huge power surge, you're fine. You can still go it alone. You're not married to AI, as an example. And I think there's one thing accepting AI, and then there's another thing embracing it as well. And it's it goes beyond the recognition of, oh yes, AI is a tool, it's there, we've got to learn to live with it. It's actually thinking about ways that it can blend seamlessly into what you're doing today as well. So finding the ways, again, creatively, I feel like I'm using this word a lot, but finding these ways creatively as to how you can embed it in processes and get the best out of it, rather than just accepting it as a dark cloud of a necessary evil there. And yeah, we again touched on relationship management, and part of what I evangelize about being in supply chain and operations for so long is that I think a lot of people outsiders don't necessarily see the amount of communication and soft skills that you need to do well in these type of roles. And yeah, that's really got to be what you champion going forward, and how you differentiate as an individual, as an organization, is making sure that you retain that human contact, especially in things such as healthcare.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So despite the tech becoming a more integral and more important and ever bigger part in our lives, relationships are still key. It's people doing business with people. It's not just companies doing business with companies. That's fascinating. Now, thanks very much, Emma. I actually have a last question that I wanted to ask you. None of us have a perfect crystal ball, but if we just look into the future, what do you think kind of maybe some of the principles or some of the kind of the key elements of the evolution of logistics operations, supply chain operations, specifically in a kind of in the medical testing and dev kind of space? What would that look like? What would you think about? Well, things to watch for, things to try and avoid, or things to embrace? What we talked about technology, kind of in general. What do you think future holds for the next foreseeable horizon.
Yeah, certainly. It's funny you mention about the crystal ball. I feel like in our roles, you do need a bit of psychic ability, certainly with how things change currently. But yeah, I think thinking specifically to the healthcare market, whether that's logistics or more broadly, personalization and bringing that point of care closer to home, I think is going to be particularly important. Being able to have that middle mile part of logistics automated as much as possible, and really having that last mile delivery to the customer and then onwards. We can use an example of biological samples going to a lab, having that reverse or that returns logistics piece as streamlined and as visible as possible is going to be critical. I've talked a little bit earlier about accessibility as well. So some of the tools, some of the technology we mentioned, having that act as a tool to bring the healthcare to whether it's at home or alternate site. But for some years now, we've been seeing this trend moving away from or less reliance on a traditional healthcare setting and bringing things closer to the patient, whether that be at home or somewhere more accessible for them than a hospital that may be located an hour or more so away. I think we're thinking about logistics as well. So some of the developments, again, something that's been on a trajectory for some time is cold chain as well, logistics. And I think particularly with biological samples that I've been talking about, that's really important, even if we're looking at shifting samples across borders, being able to manage samples safely with the correct handling. And yeah, some things that we've been exploring in Hurdle is the telematics as well in logistics. So being able to, have data through that logistics journey, which historically has been a bit of a black spot or at least a grey spot in terms of visibility. But IoTs, telematics, being able to understand not just where the specimen is in the journey, but making sure the stability and the handling is correct. Which is very important for handling, some biological data from a patient, whether it be a clinical trial or for a medical diagnostics use case. And then I think, again, leaning back on the human role, the collaboration. I think there's a really, really strong role that supply chain professionals in healthcare can play with, whether it's the clinicians, biomedical scientists, and really having that collaboration or workflow to design and refine workflows and establish what best practice would look like. A supply chain professional may have a very defined idea of what looks like good for delivery, but a clinician or a lab scientist may have other perspectives that we just naturally wouldn't know or wouldn't have visibility of. So being able to open up that communication and collaborate cross-functionally with folks outside of the business, I think is really going to help drive that pathway to be meaningful for the end patient.
No, perfect. Well, thanks very much, Emma. That's been fascinating. There's a lot of touch points, lots of very interesting and important questions that we've raised and discussed. And it's every industry is fascinating, and that one is really, really close to everybody's heart. And thanks again for agreeing to be with us on the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you very much.